I'm Christian Dorsey, and you're watching VoiceBox. One of the unique things about the world that we live in today is that we're overloaded with information. But how much of it is really focused on what is nearest and dearest to us, our local communities? To be able to give you the news that you can use and understand the true role that many people and organizations are having in making our community one that we're proud of. For more than a decade, affordable housing has been a dominant issue in the public policy debate in Arlington County. Now, the phrase affordable housing is quite simple, but the stakes and dynamics of how this subject affects civic life in Arlington are anything but. Now, on VoiceBox this month, we'll break down the affordable housing question with a discussion with some of the most influential stakeholders working on this issue today. We have Charlie Rinker, who is the president of Buyers and Renters Arlington, which is a grown tenant empowerment nonprofit seeking to preserve affordable housing and also the cultural diversity in Arlington. Welcome, Charlie.
Thank you.
Glad
to be here.
Joining us also is Dave Leibson, who is the on the board of directors for Arlington, for the Alliance for Housing Solutions, AHS, which is, I guess, a think and act tank, which operates here in Arlington and seeks to find solutions to expand the tools that we use to create affordable housing. We're also joined by Mark Silverwood, who is the president of the Silverwood Companies. It's a real estate development company that operates multifamily housing. It also builds homes and has done planned communities in our area, and they have developed affordable housing units in Arlington, and they still operate them today. We have Nina Janopaul, who is the executive director for the Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing, also known as APA. It's a nonprofit housing developer that works exclusively in Arlington and operates a dozen properties serving nearly 1,000 Arlingtonians. And we also have Takis Karantonis, who is the executive director for the Pike Revitalization organization, but most of you all know it as CPRO. It's a public-private partnership that guides a coalition of stakeholders involved in redeveloping Columbia Pike and adjacent areas, and coincidentally, that area contains the largest number of market-rate affordable units in Arlington. So we have an incredible panel of guests. We're going to have a great conversation. We're going to invite you to join the conversation just by watching us tonight, and if you have any comments that you'd like to share with us, send us an email to voicebox@arlingtonmedia.org. We're not going to be able to address your comments on air, but be sure to send them so we know what you're thinking. And at some point, we're also going to have a conversation with our studio audience who has joined us tonight. Thank you all, and we're going to get started with Charlie, because if anyone were to do a history of affordable housing, at least in modern times in Arlington, you'd be mentioned in the lead paragraph for your advocacy and work on the issue. So Charles, to start us off, can you give us a sense of what the history of affordable housing as a public policy issue has been in Arlington, and kind of what you've seen over the years that has gotten us to this point?
Yeah, and around the mid-70s is when I got involved with affordable housing, and the people in the county and the government certainly did not have much of a sensitivity about the need for affordable housing. It wasn't talked about. It wasn't a high priority. I was involved with AHC. We went out to do our first community neighborhood meeting with a group that we were trying to do a affordable housing project in, and just about got run out of the place we were meeting. I think that has changed quite a bit. Now the government is certainly, affordable housing is one of the top priorities, if not the top priority. Some people say it's the top priority. I think a lot more people in the county are conscious of it and the need for preserving our diversity, the need for having a mixed income community and so forth. I think that maybe around 1999 and 2000 with the Arna Valley situation. I think there was a little bit of a major shift there, although some things had been happening before that moved, you know, in the direction of more people supporting affordable housing. There were 720 households that were displaced by a developer coming in, and very little affordable housing remaining. Very few of the residents, you know, remain. And there was a Save Arna Valley coalition. We put a lot of pressure on the county board. Out of that, then, even though that was not successful, out of that, the county board set up a task force. Out of that came some targets and some goals, and I think a much more concentrated discussion on what affordable housing should be and what we should be doing.
And let's take it from there for just a second, because you've hit a few things which are directly relevant to the work Takis is doing down on Columbia Pike. Charlie, you mentioned preserving cultural diversity and not wanting to see that development actually result in the permanent displacement of residents, and that's a chief concern, Takis, down on Columbia Pike, where we do have such a large concentration of affordable units that are not affordable because there's been a public subsidy to guarantee their affordability, but just because there are a lot of prevailing market rate rents that are affordable to many people among many income levels. How do we see that what happened with Arna Valley, for example, that Charlie talked about, doesn't happen as Columbia Pike modernizes and improves?
That's a very comprehensive question. It's a very difficult question to answer, and this is why we are having this discussion to begin with. If we had the ready answers, that would be easy. It's difficult, and one of the lessons from Arna Valley is that it is indeed difficult, and it takes indeed a whole community to make it happen. It takes many stakeholders to align in the definition of what exactly affordable housing is, what the location will be, what the distribution will be. Diversity per se is what we try to maintain, but we also see in affordable housing as a community. I think that's a common concern of everybody. We see the preservation of diversity as a preservation of our resilience in different economic times. We support our competitiveness as a society, as a community around. So there is a lot of value in this preservation, of positive value in this preservation. Now, indeed, Columbia Pike today is the last repository of market rate, basically market rate affordable housing. We have roughly half of Arlington's 40 to 60% AMI. We should maybe explain that. The median income of an Arlington household is roughly over $100,000. This is a very affluent community. This is one of the highest benchmarks in the nation. When we say 60%, that means this is a home that is affordable to a family that earns 60% of that median income, under the condition that it spends 30%, roughly 30% of the family income, of the family budget for housing needs. That's roughly the definition. So 40 to 60%, these are families that make between $35,000 to $55,000 for a family of 3, a little bit more from a family of 4. And we have half of them in Arlington, in the Columbia Pike area, in the zip code 22204. From the slightly higher, from 60 to 80%, we have another third of these. We have only 10% of those who are higher than 80%, so the higher rents, actually. And this is indeed a very a large stock. Now, over the years, we've realized, and I believe that the community has realized, that it takes more than only subsidies or just a political commitment to achieve the preservation of affordable housing. We came to realize that it needs other policies to align with that, infrastructure spending, for example, investment. The reason why market rate affordable housing was in Columbia Pike is basically, or it has been left in Columbia Pike, is because Columbia Pike has been left out from the metro surge in the 70s. The reason why Arno Valley went, it was because of the importance of metro investment, of transportation investment that attracted higher economic activity, focused on places that weren't Columbia Pike. Today, things are developing in a different way, so the community is focusing on these things. Amenities or public services like schools, etc., are very important. So there is a bunch of a whole spectrum of interventions to preserve and improve affordable housing, because it's not only that our community hasn't only realized that we have to preserve diversity, it has also realized that we have to improve the living in these places.
Well, let me stop you there, because this ties into a lot of the work that Nina's doing, that APA has done in Arlington, a lot of rehabilitation of older garden-style units that you've been able to make into affordable housing for generations. And down in Columbia Pike, Takis' area, you're creating new affordable housing as part of a public-private partnership. So why don't you tell us about some of the models that APA uses to actually, create these units that we're talking about?
Sure, thank you. The go-to model for affordable housing in Arlington is clearly the preservation of these older garden apartment complexes. Arlington has the blessing as well as the challenge of having a huge influx of garden apartments and mid-rise apartments that were built around World War II, 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. That era kind of ended in the early 60s. So there's this inventory of rental housing, much of which was aging in the last decade or so. So there was an opportunity to preserve those. Those are, many of them, the market affordable units that Takis was talking about all over the county. In fact, in 2000, there were 17,000 units. About 60% of our county's rental housing stock was affordable. We're now down to 7,000. Lost 2/3 of those in that decade. Fortunately, during that same time, as Charlie mentioned, we've really reinvigorated the community commitment to affordable housing. So what are we doing? First of all, in the last 20 years, APA and some of our peers, including the Silverwood companies, bought these older garden apartment complexes, did a moderate rehab, and made a commitment to keep them affordable for 20, 30 years. Over the years, we've discovered that, wow, that commitment ends, and we still need that affordable housing 20, 30 years later. So the county has migrated to asking for 50, 60, 70 years of commitment of affordable housing. That's pretty natural for us as a nonprofit, because our commitment is actually in perpetuity, and they brought more tools to the table. So starting in 1986, the major tool for affordable housing used expertly, I'd say, in Arlington by all of us that work in this community is the low-income housing tax credit. A wonderful federal program that really encourages the preservation of affordable housing and creativity in doing it. The other piece of it is Arlington County has its own investment program, the Arlington Housing Investment Fund, AHIF. Not only has that been funded by the county annually, but it's been supplemented by developer contributions. That's really an outcome of some of this work that happened again after Arno Valley. I think the other tool we're starting to use, we're migrating a bit from just looking at rehabbing garden apartments, and these models here seem to illustrate this. We're looking at what? More density and high-rises. So in 2008, APA opened a 15-story high-rise property, our Park Roslyn apartment down near Roslyn, which is mixed income. So 60% market rate, 40% affordable. We layered some of these financing tools, the low-income housing tax credit, the AHIF program from Arlington County, but we also use density as a tool, which I think we're talking about as an important leveraging tool in the Pike as well. And then as you referenced also, the project that's soon to be developed, we're hoping to begin our part of this in July of this year, is our Arlington Mill Apartments, which is under the rubric of public land for public good. I think the county had a very visionary concept there. They owned a former grocery store, converted it into a community center, and at the time they said, well, maybe there's some way we can leverage some of this land, a 2-acre parcel, to make some of this into housing, and eventually came to the concept of affordable housing. So they are building right now, the county's building a 2-story underground parking garage, and Apple will build a 4-story apartment on top of that. So I think, you know, the federal programs, the county financing programs, preservation of existing affordable apartments, sometimes of which we also layer in there historic tax credits. There's a great state and federal program for historic tax credits, but also now density and public land for public good. So we have kind of a smorgasbord of models we're using to achieve these goals.
Excellent, thank you. And certainly APA being a nonprofit, people would normally associate nonprofit, mission-driven organizations or public housing agencies, of which there isn't one in Arlington, with this work. But we also have Mark and the Silverwood companies, which is not a nonprofit developer, who's also been engaged in the space of creating and maintaining affordable units in the county. Tell us a little bit about how that became a part of your company's portfolio, what you got out of it, and really what you see in terms of the future of for-profit developers in the affordable housing space.
Well, we started back in the late 90s doing affordable housing in a couple of different states, in West Virginia, in North Carolina, and in Virginia. And then I spent some time with the directors of housing in Arlington to see what were their really needs, where were they looking to place this kind of stuff, what neighborhoods did they want to serve. And there was quite a few different areas, and they had just started, they had some AHIF money. Back in those days, in the early 2000s, late 90s, you could use 4% tax credits, which was a much less capital for your project, and use tax-exempt bonds, because the tax-exempt bonds were a lot lower than the interest rates. So if you married those two and some affordable housing investment money, you could buy and redevelop projects, such as the Marbella apartments we did down in Fort Myers Heights. We bought those for $44,000, and the full renovation was $78,000. Today,
Per unit.
Per unit. Excuse me,
Don't want to give anybody the impression that we're talking about minuscule dollars.
$78,000 per unit. Today, that same project is running around $200,000. Okay, so it's more than tripled to get that done. And the amount of affordable housing investment fund going into each project has more than doubled. So it went from a subsidy of about $10,000 a unit in those days to anywhere from 60 to a high of about 100,000. That's a lot of money to put a roof over somebody's head. And it will not stop because of the market forces. Washington, D.C. is the #1 market in the country, and so that's all for Class A and high investments. But that trickles down from the Class A, they get pushed out if it's too expensive, to the Bs and the Cs and the Ds. And when we started this back in the late 90s, there was no interest from the national corporations in C and D properties. But then they found out, oh, these things stay full all the time. So let's come in and buy them up. So what happened to be old 1952 brick stock buildings, really, really small units, became attractive to everybody. So we continued to build more projects in the county in different areas. Some had mixes of income from some at 40%, 50%, 60% at market rate, some at 75% at market, some with using the Section 8 housing, project-based housing. So it depended upon what the board wanted in the different neighborhoods. Over time, though, we watched the markets change. I watched the qualified allocation plan that the state writes to be a little bit more geared towards nonprofits. The home investment funds, the CDBG funds, those are all earmarked towards nonprofits. And I've watched all the for-profits pretty much step back from the industry, especially in Northern Virginia. This year, in Northern Virginia, there were 8 intention letters sent to VHDA on Friday, and that goes from Loudoun County down to Prince William, all over. And in the Fairfax, Arlington, 6 of the 8 were nonprofits. The only 2 were way out in the country, where you don't need as much subsidy and you can try to do that. So it has become more difficult for our company as a for-profit because we just can't access some of the dollars that the nonprofits. We did buy and renovate some other affordable housing projects that some of the syndicators were trying to sell. So after the year 10 and they've reaped the tax credit benefit of that, they want to move on. So we bought them they're still affordable for another 19 years. We just recapitalized them and put our own private capital in along with new financing.
Okay, okay. So we've talked about a lot of tools here that have been used historically, that are used today, and there's an emerging, an emerging way that these tools are being used by various entities. But the question remains, Dave, is if we look at Arlington, and Takis, you talked about this, we've lost so much in the way of affordable housing, begs the question, do we have enough tools at our disposal, Dave? And what other kind of areas should we be looking at to arm ourselves in this fight for affordable housing?
Thank you. No, clearly we don't really have enough tools. We do have, and we should mention up front, one of our most important tools is the support we have from the community. As Charlie said, housing has become a priority of our people and of our government, and that's very important. And we need to broaden and deepen the understanding of very complex issues and questions around affordable housing in support of both the use of the tools we have now, the amount of financing and the funding and the budget that requires, as well as the development and understanding of some of the new tools that are under discussion. I should say that the Columbia Pike Land Use and Housing Study, which is the current phase of the thinking on housing problems and challenges and approaches on the Columbia Pike area, is looking at and talking about a whole range of additional tools, both the tools we use now and what are the resources that are going to be required to really deal substantively with the problems and the challenges on the Pike, and are there additional tools, are there tweaks on the tools that we have now, and we can talk about what some of those are, sure. But understanding those tools is not always easy, even for the folk that know the business, let alone that community out here that has to be supportive of what comes up. And in the end, we have to recognize that tools themselves are not going to solve the problem. They can make a dent, an important dent. We're finding out how density can really be used on the Pike. We're looking at the form-based code itself, where inclusion of affordable housing as a condition to opting into what we hope will be a streamlined process of interest to both for-profit and nonprofit developers can work. But in the end, we have to look at resources. The AHIF, which has been mentioned, we also need to understand there's the housing grant program out there that helps with the direct rental subsidies to families that most need. And I should add there, to highlight the importance of this, while we have our median income at $100,000, a question for us all is, what does it take to rent the cheapest apartment you can find in Arlington? And the answer is, it takes about 3 minimum wage jobs for the cheapest apartment you can find. So funding and resources are going to be an increasing problem. Right now, the county's putting something like $5 million a year into the AHIF program, in addition to what comes from as contributions as part of our affordable housing ordinance. We also put about $5 million a year or so into our housing grant program. But even if you take those 2 budget items alone, that's about what, 1% of the county's budget. Given the challenges we have, we think we can do more. I think part of what we have to understand is the importance of affordable housing, not just to our sense of a diverse community, but understand the linkages of affordable housing to the economic and business health of the community itself.
So a lot to chew on, and studio audience, we'll get to you for questions in just a minute, so please just let me know if you have something that you'd like to ask, and we'll be sure to get to you at the appropriate time. But several of you have touched on diversity, racial, ethnic, socioeconomic being a positive defining character for a community. And if you look at some baseline demographic numbers, Arlington, while its population grew 10% in the decade ending 2010, we did have an increase in the number of Asian Americans living in Arlington. We saw a decrease not only in the percentage, but the number. There are fewer African Americans and fewer Latinos living in Arlington today than there were in 2000. What does that mean about how we're doing in this affordable housing conversation? And anybody, please.
Well, one of the things I think it means in the fact that the county board now, and I think some people in the community at least, are talking not just about preserving our diversity and having affordable housing. They're talking about preserving community. And that really means, I think that's an additional step. That really means trying to, when a development comes along or redevelopment is going to displace people, really working with those people and trying to get them involved and trying to save some of the units in that complex, or at least in the neighborhood, for the people who live there. And we haven't done in Arlington a very good job of that. I would guess, and Mark may know maybe more about this, but I would guess we've saved units for maybe 20, maybe in some cases 30% of the people, you know, who lived there before. But I think it's closer to 20 and probably less than that in a lot of developments.
Yes, Mark.
I think one of the big points of the affordable housing in the old brick buildings down on the Pike that people don't really understand is that these buildings were built in '52. They're functionally obsolete by the time we come in to buy them. They have old systems. They cost a fortune. We have to put $32,000 to $50,000 a unit into them. They are typically run by landlords a lot of times in the some of the old ones we have that allow overcrowding. Okay, so it wears out the systems. It wears out the people. When we come in with the affordable housing, low-income housing tax credit, we are governed by the federal government. We can only allow 60% of median income. You can allow 2 people in a 1-bedroom, 4 in a 2, and 6 in a 3. Any overcrowding, you have to evict the people. Okay? I would say that when we go to buy one of these properties, we see at least sometimes 50, 60% overcrowding. Okay? So what happens is we come in, put in this program, which has got great financing. It's a huge tool for us to leverage. Okay? We have no other tools like this. But the bad part is they're over income, they're overcrowded. We typically retain 35% of the people. That's how many people on an average project for us are under 60% of median income, and the family's not overcrowded. Sometimes they might be aunts or uncles or mixed family, and they'll move into a couple of units and you save some of them. But that's one of the benefits and the curses of the low-income housing tax credit program.
Nina.
And I think the diversity question you're addressing, Christian, really is part of that bigger issue. As I said earlier, we had 17,000 market affordable units in 2000. We're now down to 7,000. That's a lot of homes. That's 10,000 homes. Now, many of them are still here, but the landlord went top to bottom and put in the granite countertops and the stainless steel appliances and the fitness center and the shuttle to Metro, and they went from being $1,000 a month to $2,000 a month. So all of a sudden it's a different demographic. The people who had lived there for decades can't stay anymore. So I think that's really separate and apart. Obviously there's some challenges specifically with our financing, and really nobody wants overcrowding in our homes anyway. So, you know, there'll be a little bit of loss there, but I think the real big issue is, as Mark said earlier, you know, some of the REITs are coming in and buying these older apartments and just changing totally the demographics of who live there, which is changing our community. So people that want to live where they work, people that can't afford 2 cars, want to take public transit. It's a very public transit rich community, and they want a better opportunity for their children. There's just fewer homes for them in their price range anymore, dramatically fewer.
Yeah, and Dave and then Takis.
Yeah, and as a community, again, as we think about the health of our community, you know, Arlington has a certain character that is a draw for a whole lot of people, a whole lot of businesses, a whole lot of economic interests. And we're at risk of losing that character, and in which case we have to say, well, all we're left with is location if we don't have that character. Location's important, but the character of Arlington has been important to our economy, and we need to be careful about losing that.
Takis?
Well, there is a basic understanding that there is a labor market in the metropolitan area that drives pretty much the demographics we have and the demand for housing, which ultimately drives the price of or defines the price of housing. We are at full employment in Arlington. We have an employment rate that's less than 5%. Whoever tries to start a business in Arlington will have to find a workforce. And in a community with full employment, you cannot find a workforce next to your business. You have to try to bring in this workforce from somewhere else. So you have to compete with others, and eventually you will offer higher wages, and eventually we will expect higher productivity. So more skilled, you're condemned to produce high-skilled, high-wage, more productive jobs. As a matter of fact, Northern Virginia is one of the job machines, the job, the heartland of job creation right now in the metropolitan region. And Arlington is very successful at that. So we are actually importing a workforce that is capable and has higher salaries. So it can afford, higher priced housing. And the market reacts to that. It produces this housing. Now, when we say we want to preserve diversity, and the market has one problem, and it's savviness. It always balances in an optimal equilibrium between demand and supply at a certain point of time. It doesn't think forward, and sometimes it doesn't think backwards. It's just a certain point of time. But communities think over larger periods of time. So building up diversity is obviously also building up resilience. And diversity works both ways. It's not diverse if we have only one part of the Pike, maybe the Western Pike, Columbia Heights West, for example, that has practically very few white middle-class households. We would support diversity if we would make it enough attractive for those middle-class households to be able to live also in Columbia Heights West. And because this is a virtuous circle when it comes to economic development, they would eventually also create the tax base that would allow us to produce the bucks to feed into the AHEF, etc. So diversity is a very important economic, functional, political goal. It's not just the moral part of diversity or the cultural part of diversity. It's an economic issue in Arlington County.
You brought up some important issues, and if Takis sounded like an economist, it's because he is. So, but you know, these market forces, which you know have served to help create a fairly affluent community that desires and you know creates a market for higher priced housing, can in many ways be a tool for creating more mixed income and affordable opportunities elsewhere. But Mark, as you, I believe, mentioned in your opening, it kind of drives, or maybe Takis, maybe it was you in the beginning, it just drives up the associated costs of providing that affordable housing as you make land more expensive and the subsidies required to actually get it done just keep going up and up and up, which means more and more public support is needed. So, you know, the question, I guess, for you all, is there a point at which this becomes unsustainable? Is there a point at which the desire to have affordable housing versus the sometimes competing desire to have a large tax base in an affluent community just makes, you know, one impossible? Dave?
Well, probably at some level there might be, but I again would argue that the level, the kind of community this is, a 1% of our budget investment in both the capital costs and the rental subsidies is not huge, and that we could afford more. To be sure, that's easier said than done, and there are a lot of interests that we all also support. But again, I think there's plenty of room to go up, particularly if we use those resources and tools in a good leveraged way to understand what does it take. I think one of the things we're looking, certainly in Columbia Pike, looking at, for example, what would it take to incentivize the owners, some of them long-standing family owners of some of the garden complexes. What would it take to make it interesting for them to keep those apartments at a market affordable rate, keep them more or less at the rates they are now? What would that take? And however the tool is structured, it's going to require some resources.
Okay.
I think when you look at some of the issues, is, you know, one is that Arlington County created this mess. It got all the metros. It created these fantastic buildings. It created a great job base. Okay, the board and everybody, they did a great job at balancing the economy here. Washington has become a global city. It wasn't back in the early 90s. As it blossomed, the jobs came. We have the highest number of PhDs in the country in this region. Okay, so those people are renters by choice. A lot of them, they move in and out. They move to other global cities. So they want amenities, they get those amenities, and the price goes up. And those little old buildings get torn down because that's what the market wants. So if the county as a whole, the people that live here, want more diversity and want to keep this going, there's a couple of tools. It's dollars, it's political will, and it's density. So on the Columbia Pike, as we move forward towards getting a trolley or bus rapid transit, which is a very big investment, one of the things Dave was talking about, the other thing you do is, because you're not going to keep the people in the old brick buildings to subsidize this stuff forever, because it's not their job. They own real estate. They can do whatever they want. It's a free market society in Virginia. But if you create densities of 3 to 4 times what they are existing, that becomes, and you can tear those down, then you could build back that many more units. It's economically sound for a landowner to take that obligation on and provide a higher level of dedicated affordable housing coming back into a project. Because these old buildings have been around for 60 years, 70 years. They're just not there anymore, okay? So it's time to tear them down, build the new technology, the green, the LEEDs, the everything else that brings the cost down, and have that for the next 60 or 70 years, but create the more housing, because without that much more housing on the Pike, this trolley is serving what, okay? And I mean, that's part of the goal of the housing study, is to bring more people on and create some more balance there.
Now, I suspect that there are a lot of people watching at home who are with this conversation, talking about the spirit of it, as we talked about affordable housing writ large, but then when you name that D word, density, we probably got a few people who raised their hackles. So we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. But before that, we've got a question in our studio audience. Mr. Lowe?
I've been in Arlington for over 70 years, so I've seen it grow. But it seemed like you're double talking it. In other words, you're building the high rises and you're tearing down the low rental housing. For instance, Honor Valley is number 1. You tore Honor Valley down. Sure, it was needed repairing or something of that nature if you really wanted affordable housing. Then you came to the Dunbar homes, which was 84 units. You bought the people out of that, and you put up homes of $600,000, $700,000. So no low rental person could afford it. Even with my salary, I couldn't afford down there. Now you're coming to George Washington Carver Mutual Homes. That's being sold, and I'm told that's 41 units, which have been there, sure, a long time. But like to me, it could be remodeled instead of tearing it down. And what are you going to put there? 30-some high-cost townhouses. I think it's 30-some. What you've done now, you have decreased the affordable housing, even with the Dunbar homes and George Washington Mutual. You have decreased the affordable housing by 99 units. You helped to put up the Macedonia, of course, which I think is in the class of affordable housing, and that was only 36 units. So you're still short in the way you're operating it. Seems to me if you would, every high-rise apartment you put up, the owner or whoever, the company that's in charge of it, could make a percentage of those affordable housing. Okay. A large percent of affordable housing, and you then could get a balance, because what you're doing, you're decreasing in Arlington affordable housing in a long way. You know, truthfully, you're decreasing because you're putting up high-rise apartments, and all of the affordable is being torn down and losing units.
Let's talk about those two very real issues. You know, Mark, you talked about density being a tool, but you know, in many examples in Arlington, you have a loss that far exceeds the gain in what may come later. And then a question a lot of people probably have if they lived in different communities outside the Commonwealth is, why is this so hard? Why don't you just say a certain number of units in any new project be designated as affordable? So why don't we get into some of the uniqueness of development in Arlington and in the Commonwealth? Charles, you want to start off?
And just again, in a little bit of history, we're a Dillon Rule state in Virginia, which basically means we can't do anything that the state legislature doesn't want the localities to do. The county board can't take a lot of actions that they would maybe like to do. The county board in, I guess, late 90s created an affordable dwelling units ordinance that did pretty much what you're talking about. Set aside at that point, when the county board passed it, that each new development would have to have 10% of the gross floor area as affordable. Well, developers took the county to court and went to the state, and basically the state said you can't do that, and we formed this roundtable discussion, came up with developers and activists and county board and county staff people and nonprofits, and we came up with a solution that set aside 5% as opposed to 10, and took that back to the state, and with everybody's support, including the development community, that has great power in the state, actually, more so than regular citizens. So what happened is we got that to replace, but what happens now in most of those developments is people pay money as opposed to building units. And that would be all right in some cases, but in other cases, like you say, we lose the units. And it's a conundrum, if you will.
Okay. Dave?
Sure. Well, one of the things that's being explored on the Columbia Pike, through the Columbia Pike study, and I want to parentheses note that, the issues in Columbia Pike are really across the county. They're not just in South Arlington. Columbia Pike being an opportunity.
It's just very illustrative. Right now,
exactly. Right? But one of the things that's being studied there is whether or not and how the form-based code could be designed in a way to get some of this. I'm stumbling. I don't want to use the word inclusionary housing because it's such a no-no in the state.
There's no one from the Commonwealth here to take you away. It's okay.
But more carefully put is, can there be density and other incentives designed into the form-based code itself so that it's interesting enough for for-profit or not-for-profit developers to develop properties or redevelop or preserve properties, the whole range, but including X% of the units as affordable. It takes a lot of pretty careful analysis to figure out, well, what's the level of incentive that's required economically to make it work, and whether it's for-profit or for not-for-profit, the economics are really the same. What level of incentives, how to structure those incentives to make it interesting enough for people to want to opt into a form-based code.
I think in this region, one thing is that when Washington woke up as an international city, the national developers came in and started buying real estate here like never before. Vornado, huge REIT, they own Crystal City. Avalon Bay, Archstone, name on and on and on and on. Those companies are not all located here. They don't believe in Arlington. They like Arlington because they make money, right, but they might be in Denver or Chicago or New York or something. So they may look at it differently than some of the older families that have been here. But to put it really simply, the market rate rental is affordable to somebody from about 85% to maybe 95% of area median income today. If you're going to take a rent that's up here and you want to rent it to somebody who's down here at 60, somebody's got to pay that mortgage. And the appreciation rate on the 60% is about 2.8 to 3.2% a year. And historically, over 25 years in the market, it's 4.5%. So if you have a fiduciary responsibility to a corporation to make it the most profitable as you can, you've got to look at this and figure out how you do it. Because we are a Dillon-ruled state, you can't force anyone to do that. So as a community, if Arlington wants to continue to support a balanced community with affordable housing and diversity, it's going to come out of the pocket of the Arlingtonians.
And Nina, yes,
well,
please.
And I think the challenge that we've been looking at Columbia Pike, as Dave says, this is a microcosm of what's going on in the county, is really how we can amass more tools to make this happen. And I think Mr. Lowe's comment is very accurate. This is what's happening in Arlington today. The market is driving redevelopment of older properties. The land is more valuable than the current community and the rental business that's in there now. How do we fight that? Well, we had a tools forum about a year ago, brought in experts from around the country. And by the way, all those experts said putting a streetcar down Columbia Pike, that will accelerate that process. You will see prices go up again, just as they have in the Metro Corridor in Roslyn, Ballston. So we know it's coming. The streetcar is slated to come on board in 2016. And they suggested a whole array of tools, which many of them weren't available to us. Inclusionary zoning is a major tool in California. California has huge problems with high-cost housing and not being able to house the people that live there. They've done this across the state. Many municipalities, if a developer comes in and builds 100 homes, 10 of them have to be affordable. Massachusetts has done some similar things. It's very frustrating for us. So that's why we're trying to be creative. But at the end of the day, I think the comment somebody made about political will is the key. This is a wealthy county. That development means more tax dollars coming in, means more employers coming in. So it's all about political will. How do you make your choices? We've got some other big items on the plate now. We have overcrowding in our schools. We've got some capacity that we need to enlarge to accommodate that. Nobody's going to say we can't do that. We have to accommodate that. But where does affordable housing and diversity fit in there? And hopefully it fits in there as a major goal, as an important thing that's worthy of either increasing our taxes or diverting some of our tax revenues to invest in that.
Thank you. We've got another question from our audience. Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Mike, we'll get to you in just a second. There we go.
Sure. Thank you. I've been hearing you talk about the political will and also the cost of the taxpayer. And I'm just wondering, when you look at the average property owner, taxpayer who's struggling with paying their property tax bill, and they're looking at, well, how much of what portion of the property tax bill are they paying toward affordable housing in the most immediate sense, in the short term, and they figure X amount of dollars is going to the cost of affordable housing in the county. What do you tell them is the cost of not paying that dollar amount to go to affordable housing? How does it cost them, either financially, socially, culturally, the commercial centers in the county? How do you tell them that the amount of money that you're paying, that you're struggling, this is what the cost will be if you don't?
Thank you. It's a great question. I'm going to designate Charles to start us off, if you'd like.
Well, I have one comment, if I can just start on
Sure.
the dollars.
Yeah, go ahead.
Our total government spending in Arlington County is about $1 billion. So the dedicated funds that we put into affordable housing, to the AHIF program, to creating new affordable housing, it's about $4 million a year, not including developer contributions. So that's less than 1%. So just to give us some context, I think it's a great question, but we should, even though these are high-profile projects and they require a lot of time and attention, it's a very small part of Arlington County's budget.
But another part of your question is, regardless of what the amount is, what are the benefits to a community for affordable housing? Regardless of what the amount they're contributing is, what benefit do they get in return?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are a lot of benefits that we've some of which we've talked about here. I think people really like the kind of cultural diversity we have, different kinds of restaurants, different kinds of small businesses around, and that's gonna, the small business situation is exactly like affordable housing. When their rents go up, they have to move. So, that's gonna also occur. As was said earlier, employers need people who are closer to work, to their place of employment. It's easier for them to work with their employees, and if somebody's sick or not and has to travel a long time. It certainly is a benefit in terms of our environmental, the amount of driving and emissions, issues and so forth. It's certainly a plus to have people that live close to where they work or can use metro or bike to work. So there are a lot of, I wanted to say one quick thing about the discussion earlier. We were talking about the streetcar on Columbia Pike. I think it's absolutely correct, as Nina said, that it's going to just gentrify the area if we don't do it correctly. I think the numbers, we're going to spend about $261 million to do that.
That's today. It might go up next week.
Well, that's right. By the time we do it, it will definitely go up. But what I think we need to be doing on that, for example, that's also going to drive, the tax revenue up. I think the county board has to set aside some number, and I'd say maybe 50% of the increased tax revenue, not just by the streetcar, but by the whole redevelopment that's going on in Columbia Pike. Set that aside for affordable housing resources and use that then to keep people from being displaced, to keep affordable housing there. It's not going to solve the problem, but it'd be a big jump in terms of the amount of money that we need to have to make affordable housing.
Here on Voice Box tonight, we've got the proposal of a new tool, a tax increment dedicated funding source for affordable housing. Breaking news on Voice Box tonight. Takis.
I like the mention of Carver Homes, because Carver Homes illustrates how things can go wrong. And they've been going wrong with affordable housing in this our country for a while. I don't believe that projects is a good thing today. In the 70s, in the 60s, it was the holy grail. It was the ultimate policy that would give decent housing to many, many people. But we tried with public policy to do social engineering, and we probably failed in many, many cases, way too many cases. Now, Carver Homes is a mutual, is a co-op. It's in a predominantly African American neighborhood, that's Arlington View, which is very challenged because it has been encapsulated by impenetrable highways. It's a virtual cul-de-sac that can only exit to the Pike. In the 70s, it lost the all parallel connectivity to the Pike. So everything that can go wrong with a neighborhood from the point of view of urban design went wrong in Arlington View. And we allowed that to happen. Now, one of the consequences is that Carver Home owners, the owners of the co-op, couldn't afford to keep their property up, to help their neighborhood to improve, and consequentially also to improve their own place. So their own place was run down, and it was an easy prey for speculators.
He's talking about
and Carver Homes in Arlington View.
Yeah, I live there.
Yeah.
Not in the homes. I have a house in Arlington View.
Let's just let this, we're just running short on time. I don't want to stop debate.
My whole point is that when we answer to the Arlington taxpayer where the money goes, and what is the benefit that he or she buys with their property taxes, it's obviously it's a whole bunch of things. The streetcar, yes, the streetcar is most probably going to increase economic activity. It will create jobs. It will create small businesses. It will create basically the economic base that will create the dollars to support affordable housing if we want to keep this So the streetcar is basically a leverage tool. All basic, all infrastructure investment is a leverage tool. It will allow us to have better schools, more accessible schools. It will allow to workers, to workforce to move easily and less expensive. Plus, and that's the most important part, when we, the community, the public interest, try to negotiate with developers, try to negotiate with the almighty market, it's better that we have a stake, some skin in the game ourselves. If we own the transit means, if we own this capital, we have a completely different negotiating position. If I stand today with a relatively, maybe affordable but relatively run-down neighborhood, and I have a developer in front of me, I don't have so much leverage. Either I take it or I leave it when they try to get some investment going. If I have
discuss leverage and tools
more
in
capital,
just a second.
yes.
Thank you, Takis. I'm sorry, we just have another question from our studio audience that I want to get to.
Yes, thank you. My name is Sandra, and I live in Arlington, in what used to be Freedman's Village. You speak a lot about sustaining communities and keeping people in Arlington. I'm going to ask a question. You speak a lot about rental units, and this question is actually for home ownership. Can there be a guarantee that displaced renters will be allowed first right of refusal in order that they stay in and purchase the homes in which they live, and what tools are available to that regard?
So tenant empowerment. We're going to go to the person who's the president of the board of an organization that works in that space. So, Mr. Rinker.
Just statistically, Arlington is one of the largest tenant populated counties in the country, and or cities or counties. 57% of our population are tenants. Part of that, even in terms of affordable housing, has been because we have the low-income housing tax credit program that helps us do rental. We don't have any programs, basically. The county does have a program called MIPAP, Moderate Income Purchase Assistance Program. The problem is, at this point, it's not funded. You know, the county is not really doing much in terms of home ownership. I have, you know, pushed for years for the county to have a larger portion of its overall stock as homeowners, for homeowners. And not only, I mean, generally for homeowners, but also for affordable home ownership. And I think that's really, really important. I think I don't know exactly what it was in 75 or, you know, 1975 or thereabouts, but I know it was probably at least 10% more homeowners than renters. So I think, you know, to get to your question about the first right of refusal, DC has a first right of refusal, and it works beautifully. I work with tenants trying to help them purchase their I do multifamily, but it's single family as well. That'd be wonderful, but again, we're a Dillon rule state. We will really, it will be impossible, at least everybody that I've talked to just basically said it's impossible for us to get the state to allow Arlington to do that. Now, what do? We change the state politics, I guess. I mean, that's difficult, but that's
right now
maybe what we need to.
And Dave, let me ask you to close, because you wanted to comment on Takis' point about leverage and using tools to work with developers. So I'll give you the chance for the last word here.
Well, actually, I wasn't. There's a lot of work going on in tools, and we really need to pay attention. I was really going to go back to the point about what do we say to the taxpayer, the property taxpayer, about why.
That'll work
and I think there are two things that are really important to almost everybody in the county: their kids and their schools. That's part of what makes Arlington what it is. A couple of years ago, at one of our public hearings on housing, when Charlie and I were on the Housing Commission, one of the 30-something teachers in the schools got up and talked about how much she loved teaching in the Arlington schools, how great they were, how good they were to everybody. And then she said, I would just love to be able to live here.
Yeah. And with that, we're going to have to close this conversation, which could go on for a much longer time. Mark and Nina, I apologize for not giving you a chance to make a final word, but this is by no means the last of a conversation about affordable housing, and I'm going to make a very public plea to have all 5 of you back again, because there's so much more to talk about with this issue. Thank you all for watching, and thank you for the studio audience for your great questions. I'm Christian Dorsey, and this has been VoiceBox, and we'll see you next time.